It was a quiet afternoon when the unthinkable happened. The sun had just started to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the street. In the distance, a little girl ran, her small feet pounding against the pavement. Her breath came in quick gasps, her face pale with fear. Behind her, the sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, chasing her every move, grew louder. The girl didn't stop to look back. She knew that if she did, it might be the last thing she ever saw. With trembling hands, she reached for the nearest house, her small body colliding with the door, desperate for safety. That's when she found herself face to face with an elderly woman, Mrs. Thompson, who had seen everything unfold from her front porch. The moment their eyes met, the girl's fear seemed to spill out in a single sob. "Help me," the girl gasped, her voice shaking. "He's coming for me. He's going to take me." Mrs. Thompson, a woman who'd lived through more than her fair share of strange happenings in her long life, felt the weight of the child's terror. There was something wrong, something terribly wrong, about the girl's plea. Before she could even ask what had happened, the girl whispered something so chilling that Mrs. Thompson's heart skipped a beat. The words were barely audible, but they were clear. "He's in the house. He's already inside." Suddenly, the elderly woman's instincts kicked in. She grabbed her phone, dialing 911 with hands that had never shaken before. But as she waited for the operator to pick up, her eyes moved to the house the girl had run from, and that's when she saw it. The curtain twitching in the window. Someone, or something, was watching them from inside. She pressed the phone to her ear, but was the call enough? Would they make it out alive? As the clock ticked on, Sarah felt the heavy silence settle around her like a thick fog. It had been hours since she first stepped into this place, but time seemed to lose all meaning. The house was strangely cold, the kind of cold that gets into your bones, even though the heater hummed in the background. Her fingers brushed over the dusty old photographs on the wall, some so faded she could hardly make out the faces. But it wasn't the pictures that bothered her. It was the eyes. They felt alive, watching her every move. Sarah quickly pulled her hand away, trying to shake off the chill creeping up her spine. The house wasn't much, just an old two-story with peeling paint and crooked window panes. Yet there was something off about it, something that gnawed at her, even though she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was the way the walls seemed to pulse, or how the floorboards creaked, even when no one was around. Sarah had always been a practical person, never one to believe in ghost stories or superstitions. But this place, it felt different, like something was lurking just out of sight, waiting for her to discover it. Her eyes lingered on the staircase in front of her, the dark wooden steps leading up to the second floor. Something about the upper level made her uneasy. She had promised herself she'd go up there to check out the old attic, the one her grandmother had always warned her to avoid. But each time she took a step toward it, something in the back of her mind whispered that it was better left untouched. The hairs on her neck stood up as she thought about the strange noises she'd heard earlier, the faint scratching sounds that echoed through the house as though someone, or something, was trying to get in. She shook her head. Asterisk at a grip, Sarah. Asterisk, her grandmother, had always been dramatic, spinning tales of long-lost family secrets and dark curses. Still, she couldn't ignore the sense of dread that seemed to hang in the air. The deeper she went into the house, the more she felt like she was being pulled into a story she wasn't ready to understand. Mrs. Thompson's heart raced as she stared at the house. Her fingers tightened around the phone, her thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. What did the little girl mean? How could someone be inside the house without her knowing? The more she thought about it, the less sense it made. She had been sitting on her porch for hours, and she hadn't seen anyone enter or leave. Yet the girl was certain someone was there. The 911 operator's calm voice broke through her panic. 911, what's your emergency? Mrs. Thompson could barely speak, her throat tight. She tried to gather herself, forcing the words out. There's a little girl here. She says someone's inside her house, but I don't know if it's true. She's terrified. Please send someone. Stay with her, the operator urged. Help is on the way. Mrs. Thompson nodded, though she knew the girl would be terrified if she tried to calm her down. The girl was still trembling violently, clinging to her sleeve as if her life depended on it. Mrs. Thompson turned back to the house, her mind racing. The light inside flickered. Was it just the wind? Or was something moving inside, something unseen? The little girl, now silent except for the occasional shudder, slowly looked up at her. It's not safe. He's been watching me for days, she whispered, her voice barely a breath. I saw him in the window last night. He told me I'd never be free if I didn't do what he said. Mrs. Thompson's chest tightened as she processed the words. Who are you talking about? She asked, but the girl just shook her head, looking over her shoulder as if she could feel the eyes of someone lurking in the shadows. Meanwhile, across the street, a man in a dark jacket stood by his car, watching them. He had been standing there for a while, but no one had noticed him. His eyes flickered to the house, the same house the girl had run from, and then back to Mrs. Thompson. He hadn't expected things to unfold this quickly, but the plan was already in motion. His next move was critical. As Mrs. Thompson's mind spiraled with thoughts of who could be in the house, the little girl clutched her hand tighter, pulling her attention back. You don't understand, she said with a shaking voice. He's not just any man. He's asterisk something else asterisk. I heard him in my dreams before I saw him. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from the house, a loud bang. Both women froze, their hearts pounding in their chests. What was that? Had someone entered the house? Or was it something worse? The air seemed to thicken with dread, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Mrs. Thompson glanced at the little girl, but all she saw was a face full of terror, eyes wide and locked on the house, as if she could feel the danger drawing closer. It was clear now, whatever was happening, whatever was inside that house, was something neither of them could handle alone. The silence between them was suffocating. Mrs. Thompson's breath hitched as she clutched the phone tighter, every muscle in her body frozen. The bang from inside the house had sent a jolt of panic through her, but what was worse was the feeling that something, or someone, was getting closer. She could feel it in the air, like the world around her had gone still in anticipation. The little girl, wide-eyed and trembling, was now staring at the house like she could see something they couldn't. Something dark, something dangerous. Another thud echoed from within, louder this time, followed by what sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate. Mrs. Thompson's pulse quickened. Was someone coming out? Was it the person the girl had been so terrified of? Her thoughts raced, each one more terrifying than the last. She wanted to call out, to demand that whoever was inside show themselves, but she couldn't. The fear was suffocating. Every inch of her body screamed to run, to take the girl and get as far away from this house as possible. But there was no time. They couldn't leave now, not with someone, or asterisk something asterisk, inside. The girl's whispered warning replayed in her mind. Asterisk, he's not just any man. He's something else asterisk. It was that last part that gnawed at her, twisting her stomach into knots. The elderly woman had seen her fair share of strange occurrences in her life, but she had never felt something this dark, this unsettling. The girl's hand trembled in Mrs. Thompson's grip as she suddenly whispered again, her voice barely a sound. He's coming out. He's here. Mrs. Thompson's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes darted back to the house, then to the street, trying to make sense of everything. Had anyone else seen what was happening? Were they just too far away to help in time? The world seemed to shrink in on her as the minutes dragged on, each second stretching out with unbearable tension. Suddenly, the door to the house creaked open, inch by inch. The shadows inside shifted, and Mrs. Thompson's heart raced as she saw a figure emerge. Tall, cloaked in darkness, moving with an unnatural stillness. She couldn't make out his face, but his presence was overwhelming, like a storm that was gathering strength. The girl gasped and pressed herself closer to Mrs. Thompson, her small frame shaking with fear. Then from behind, there was a voice, deep, calm, and unsettlingly familiar. "I told you not to bring her here, Mrs. Thompson," it said, and Mrs. Thompson froze. The words echoed in her mind, but it wasn't the voice of a stranger. It was someone she had known, someone she thought was long gone. The man took a step forward, his presence looming like an insidious shadow. And with that one movement, Mrs. Thompson's world tilted. The girl's warning had been true. This wasn't just a man. It was something far more dangerous, and they were both trapped in a nightmare that had only just begun. As I sat down to enjoy the meal I brought, I thought everything would finally be okay. No more stomach pains, no more running to the bathroom mid-meal. But then something even stranger happened. I began to notice a few things that didn't sit right with me at all. My in-laws were acting a little off. It wasn't just the food anymore. The conversation felt forced. Everyone seemed a little too eager to brush things off whenever I asked about the ingredients or the way certain dishes were prepared. The tension in the air was palpable, but no one was acknowledging it. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. What could they be hiding? I thought I had figured it out when I brought my own food, but now I was more confused than ever. I decided to keep my guard up, but the more I paid attention, the more I started to notice odd patterns. Little things that at first seemed trivial but suddenly felt more like red flags. What was going on behind the scenes that no one wanted to talk about? Just when I thought it couldn't get any more bizarre, something happened that completely changed the course of everything. It left me questioning not just the dinners, but my entire relationship with my in-laws. Was there something more sinister going on, or was I just overthinking it all? Keep watching to find out how the mystery unfolded, and how it all led to a shocking, unexpected discovery that I never saw coming. I decided to confront my in-laws directly. I had to know what was going on, so I asked to speak with them privately. The conversation started off awkwardly, but after a few moments, the truth came spilling out. It turns out that my mother-in-law, who I always admired for her cooking, had been secretly using a prepackaged ingredient in almost every dish. The catch? It was a product that had been recalled for contamination. It wasn't something you could easily notice unless you paid close attention. That's why I kept getting sick after each dinner. But here's where it took an unexpected turn. My husband, who I thought was completely unaware, admitted that he'd known about it all along. He had just never said anything to me, thinking it was just a one-off mistake. I was shocked, but the story wasn't over yet. The real kicker came when my father-in-law joined the conversation. He pulled out a small, almost forgotten box from the pantry. It turned out that they had been using it to save time during their busy schedules. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much it had all been a series of little lies piled on top of each other. Not only was I in the dark, but the entire family was caught up in their own web of excuses and guilt. It was a mess I hadn't expected. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The truth behind all my sicknesses wasn't just about the food. It was about the layers of secrets, avoidance, and the way small issues had been blown out of proportion. But just when I thought everything had been revealed, My mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. The ingredient wasn't just contaminated by mistake. It had been sabotaged by someone close to the family. She had no idea who, but she suspected a family friend who had been trying to make things interesting by causing drama in their lives. It was the final twist I never saw coming. In the end, I realized that what started as a simple issue with food turned into something much bigger. The situation was more complicated than just getting sick. It was about trust, communication, and hidden tensions within the family that no one had ever fully addressed. While I could finally stop worrying about the food, I was left questioning how much I really knew about the people closest to me. It made me wonder, what else had been kept from me all along? The storm raged on, rain hammering against the roof as Daniel rushed through the dimly lit corridor. His breath came in ragged gasps, his pulse a frantic drumbeat in his ears. He could hear footsteps behind him, closing in, too fast. His hands fumbled for the key in his pocket, slick with sweat, as he reached the locked door at the end of the hall. The moment the key slid into the lock, a cold hand clamped onto his shoulder. He twisted violently, expecting to see his pursuer's face, but instead, he found himself staring into wide, terrified eyes. Emma. "It's not him," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. It was never him. Confusion jolted through Daniel like an electric shock. "What do you mean?" Before she could answer, the door behind them burst open, revealing a figure silhouetted against the flickering emergency lights. It wasn't Carter, the man they had been running from. It was someone far more familiar. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. No, that's impossible. The figure stepped forward, the dim light illuminating a face he had trusted all along. "You were never supposed to find out," the voice said, calm and steady. "But you just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Emma took a shaky step backward. "We trusted you." The betrayal settled over Daniel like a heavy weight. Every clue, every piece of the puzzle had led them to believe Carter was the one behind everything. But all along, it had been right in front of them, hidden behind a reassuring smile and empty reassurances. "I had no choice," the figure continued, eyes dark with resolve. "You were getting too close. If I let you walk away now, everything I've built falls apart." A deafening clap of thunder shook the walls. Daniel clenched his fists. "You don't have to do this. We can fix this together." For the first time, hesitation flickered across their betrayer's face. It was brief but enough. Emma seized the moment, lunging forward with all the strength she had left. A struggle broke out, chaos erupting in the narrow space. In the end, it wasn't a well-planned strategy or sheer strength that decided the outcome. It was the weight of truth, the unbearable guilt that had been lurking beneath the surface. As the storm outside began to calm, the nightmare finally unraveled. The authorities arrived, questions were asked, and the truth came to light. But just as relief began to settle, Daniel noticed something. A small, almost imperceptible smirk on their betrayer's lips as they were led away. A chill ran down his spine. This wasn't over. Not yet. The police car lights faded as Daniel and Emma stood in the empty corridor, the echoes of the storm slowly subsiding. In the aftermath of the chaos, the truth had finally emerged, leaving behind both relief and lingering questions. Emma's voice, soft yet resolute, broke the silence. "It's over now," she said, though the doubt in her eyes hinted at a story that might never be fully closed. Daniel took a deep breath, trying to reconcile the betrayal he had just experienced with the love and trust he had once placed in his closest ally. The twist in their lives had not only shattered old beliefs, but it also ignited a determination to rebuild what was lost. As investigators meticulously pieced together the evidence, the betrayal was revealed to be part of a larger conspiracy that stretched far beyond personal vendettas. The man they had trusted, whose slight smirk still haunted Daniel's memory, had been orchestrating events in the shadows for years, using their friendship as a shield for his true ambitions. Slowly, the community began to understand the warning signs, the subtle hints of mistrust, the unexplained absences, and the quiet tension that had always lurked beneath the surface. In the following days, Daniel dedicated himself to healing. He reached out to old friends and started to share his experiences, hoping that the lessons learned from deception and betrayal would help others stay vigilant. Emma, too, found solace in helping victims of similar circumstances, turning her pain into strength by supporting those who had suffered in silence. In the final moments of the ordeal, Daniel stood by the now calm riverbank, watching the gentle ripples in the water. The experience had left him with a profound understanding of the fragility of trust and the resilience of the human spirit. With a quiet determination, he acknowledged that life was a mix of light and shadow. The unexpected twist, though painful, had ultimately taught him to value truth and forgiveness above all. As he turned to leave, Daniel felt a newfound sense of clarity, a reminder that every ending carries the seed of a new beginning, and that even in the darkest times, hope can light the way forward.